I was stacking oak logs in my driveway when I first noticed Susan Schneider standing at the edge of my property line. Her phone raised and pointed directly at me like some kind of digital weapon. It was a cold Saturday morning in November 2024, and I had been running my firewood business from my home in Meadowbrook Estates, a subdivision outside Charlotte, North Carolina, for the past 3 years without a single problem. Well, that was about to change in ways I never could have anticipated. "Excuse me," Susan called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the crisp autumn air. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I set down the log I was holding and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Morning, Susan. Just organizing my inventory. How are you today?" Her face, already pinched with what seemed to be permanent disapproval, tightened even further. She was maybe 50 years old, with that specific haircut that screamed "I want to speak to the manager," and a designer tracksuit that probably cost more than my entire week's worth of firewood sales. "Your inventory," she practically spat the word. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a commercial lumber yard. I'm filing a complaint with the HOA immediately." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "Susan, I've been doing this for 3 years. I'm a registered business with the state. Everything's completely legal and above board." "We'll see about that," she said, snapping one more photo before turning on her heel and marching back toward her house 3 doors down. My name is Frank Garrison, and I had moved to Meadowbrook Estates 5 years ago after my divorce. The house was modest but perfect for my needs, with a decent-sized backyard, and most importantly, a large driveway and detached garage where I could run my seasonal firewood business. I worked as an accountant during tax season, but from September through March, I supplemented my income by selling firewood to local residents and businesses. I had all my permits, paid my taxes quarterly, and never once had a customer complain. The business was registered with the North Carolina Secretary of State. I had a sales tax permit, and I filed my Schedule C every year like clockwork. Everything was legitimate and legal. But Susan Schneider had become the HOA president 6 months ago, and apparently, she had made it her personal mission to transform our quiet neighborhood into some kind of pristine suburban utopia, where nothing practical or remotely interesting was allowed to happen. I went back to stacking wood, trying to put the encounter out of my mind. I had a delivery of 2 cords of split hickory coming that afternoon, and I needed to make room in my storage area. The weather forecast predicted an early cold snap, which meant business would pick up soon. 2 days later, I found the letter in my mailbox. It was printed on official Meadowbrook Estates HOA letterhead, with Susan's name prominently displayed as president. "Dear Mr. Garrison," it read, "it has come to the attention of the Homeowners Association Board that you are operating a commercial business from your residential property, in violation of Section 7.3 of the HOA covenants, which specifically prohibits commercial enterprises within the subdivision. You are hereby ordered to cease and desist all commercial activities immediately. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $100 and potential legal action. You have 72 hours to comply. Sincerely, Susan Schneider, HOA President." I read the letter 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each reading. I pulled out my copy of the HOA covenants, which I had reviewed carefully before starting my business. Section 7.3 did mention commercial activities, but it specifically exempted home-based businesses that didn't create excessive traffic, noise, or violate zoning laws. My firewood business checked all those boxes. I decided to handle this professionally. I drafted a response letter, attaching copies of my business license, tax registration, and the relevant section of the county zoning ordinance that explicitly allowed home-based businesses like mine. I even included a letter from my insurance company showing I carried proper liability coverage. I delivered it to Susan's house that evening. Her husband, a quiet man named Robert who always seemed vaguely apologetic about his wife's behavior, answered the door. "Hi, Frank," he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Let me guess, this is about the Firewood situation. Afraid so. Just want to clear things up before they get out of hand." Robert took the envelope and sighed. "I'll make sure she gets it. For what it's worth, I think you're running a perfectly fine operation, but you know Susan." I didn't know Susan. Over the past 6 months, she had filed complaints against the Hendersons for their kids' basketball hoop, threatened the Morales family over their garden gnomes, and tried to ban Mr. Peterson from working on his classic car in his own garage. She was on a crusade, and apparently I was her latest target. 3 days passed without a response to my letter. I continued my business as usual, selling to my regular customers and taking orders for Thanksgiving week delivery. Then, on Friday afternoon, while I was processing a payment from Mrs. Chen, who bought half a quart every month like clockwork, 2 police cars pulled into my driveway. My stomach dropped. Mrs. Chen looked at me with wide eyes. "It's okay," I told her, though I wasn't sure it was. "Let me handle this." 2 officers stepped out of their vehicles. The older one, whose nameplate read Officer Martinez, approached with his hand raised in a casual greeting. "Mr. Garrison, we received a call about a commercial operation being run without proper permits. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" I felt anger flash through me, but I kept my voice level. "Of course, officer. But I should tell you right away that I have all the proper permits and licenses for my business." The younger officer, Officer Dawson, was already looking around at my neatly stacked wood, the small sign I had posted with my business name and contact information, and the professional tarp covering system I used to keep everything dry. "This is quite an operation," Martinez said, not unkindly. "How long have you been doing this?" 3 years this October. "I have a registered business with the state, all my tax documentation, proper insurance, and I comply with all county zoning ordinances." "The complaint we received suggested you were running an illegal business," Dawson said, reading from a notepad. "The caller claimed you were operating without permits and in violation of neighborhood rules." "Let me guess," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Susan Schneider called you." Martinez's expression suggested I was right, though he didn't confirm it directly. "We still need to verify your documentation." I invited them into my garage, where I kept all my business files in a fireproof cabinet. I showed them everything. My business registration certificate from the North Carolina Secretary of State showing Garrison Firewood Services as a registered sole proprietorship. My sales tax permit, my quarterly tax payment receipts, my general liability insurance policy, and my county business license. Martinez examined each document carefully while Dawson took notes. Mrs. Chen had quietly left during this process, though she had given me an encouraging pat on the shoulder before departing. "This all looks legitimate," Martinez finally said. "Do you have documentation regarding the HOA regulations?" I pulled out my annotated copy of the HOA covenants, showing Section 7.3 and the specific exemption for home-based businesses that met certain criteria. I had highlighted each criterion and made notes showing how my business complied. "According to this, I'm operating completely within the HOA rules," I explained. "I don't have customers coming to the house in significant numbers. Most people order by phone or email, and I deliver to them. The few who do pick up are quick transactions." I don't generate noise beyond the occasional sound of me stacking wood, and as you can see from the county documentation, I'm in full compliance with zoning." Dawson looked at Martinez. "Seems pretty straightforward," Martinez nodded, handing my documents back. "Mr. Garrison, based on what you've shown us, you're operating a legal business. However, we had to respond to the complaint. I'd suggest you document everything related to this situation in case it escalates." "Escalates," I repeated. "You think Susan will push this further?" "Let's just say this isn't our first call to this neighborhood about HOA disputes," Martinez said diplomatically. "Document everything. Keep copies of all communications. If she continues to file false police reports, that could become a separate issue." After the officers left, I sat in my garage, staring at my business documents spread across my workbench. I had done everything right. I had researched the regulations, obtained every necessary permit, paid every required fee, and run my business professionally. Yet here I was, being harassed by someone who apparently thought her position as HOA president gave her unlimited power. I decided to be proactive. I called my lawyer, a guy named Tom Bradley, who had helped me with my divorce and various business matters over the years. "Frank, good to hear from you," Tom said when his secretary put me through. "What can I do for you?" I explained the situation, from Susan's initial complaint through the police visit. Tom listened quietly, then asked, "Do you have documentation of everything? Every single piece of paper? Business license, tax records, the HOA covenants with my notes, even receipts from my business insurance premiums." "Good. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to draft a letter to the HOA board explaining your legal position and putting them on notice that any further harassment could result in legal action. We'll cite the specific exemptions in their own covenants and make it clear that you're operating a legitimate, fully licensed business." "Will that stop her?" Tom paused. "Honestly, people like Susan Schneider usually don't stop until they're forced to, but this letter will establish a clear record. If she continues, we'll have grounds for a harassment claim, and if the HOA tries to fine you, we can fight it." "Send the letter," I said. "I'm not backing down on this. I've built this business legally, and I rely on the income." Tom's letter went out the following Monday via certified mail. In it, he detailed my business credentials, cited the relevant sections of the HOA covenants and county ordinances, and included copies of my key documentation. He concluded with a paragraph that essentially said further interference would be considered harassment and could result in legal action against both Susan personally and the HOA as an organization. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next Saturday, I was making a delivery to a customer in nearby Huntersville when I got a call from my neighbor, Bill Richardson. "Frank, you need to get home," Bill said urgently. "Susan's here with some guy in a truck, and they're taking pictures and measurements of your property." I made my apologies to my customer and rushed home, arriving to find Susan standing in my driveway with a clipboard while a man in a reflective vest measured the distance from my wood stacks to the property line. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded as I got out of my truck. Susan turned to me with a triumphant smile. "I've hired a private inspector to document your code violations. Your wood piles are too close to the property line, you're storing materials in a residential zone, and your commercial signage violates the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood." The man with the vest looked uncomfortable. "Madam, I'm just here to take measurements. I'm not making any determinations about violations." "Your measurements will speak for themselves," Susan said sharply. I took a deep breath, pulling out my phone. "Susan, you're trespassing on my property. I need you and your inspector to leave immediately, or I'm calling the police." "This is HOA business," she snapped. "I have the right to inspect for covenant violations." "Actually, you don't," I said, pulling up the HOA covenants on my phone. Section 12.2 requires written notice of at least 48 hours before any inspection, and even then, you can only inspect for specific violations related to health and safety. You've provided no notice, and there's no health or safety issue here. The inspector stepped back. "Lady, if he's saying you don't have the right to be here, I'm not getting involved. Pay me for my time and I'm out." Susan's face turned an impressive shade of red. "This isn't over, Frank. I will not allow you to turn this neighborhood into a commercial zone." "Then I suggest you read your own covenants," I said, "because what I'm doing is completely legal." After they left, Bill came over from his yard where he had been watching the whole exchange. "She's lost her mind," he said, shaking his head. "Half the neighborhood is talking about it. Did you know she tried to fine the Johnsons because their teenage son's car doesn't meet her standards?" "I'm not surprised by anything anymore," I said. "There's going to be an HOA meeting next week," Bill continued. "General membership meeting. Susan called it to discuss what she's calling commercial encroachment in the neighborhood. You should come." "Oh, I'll be there," I assured him, "with my lawyer." The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the neighborhood clubhouse. Tom Bradley agreed to attend with me, and I spent the intervening days preparing documentation. I made copies of everything: my business license, my tax returns for the past 3 years showing my firewood income and the taxes I had paid, my sales tax payment records, my insurance policy, letters from satisfied customers, and photographs showing my neat, professional setup. I also did something else. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board about Susan's behavior, documenting her trespassing, her false police report, and her harassment. I sent copies to all 5 board members, not just Susan. Thursday evening arrived cold and clear. Tom and I showed up at the clubhouse to find it packed. Apparently, word had spread about the controversy, and people were curious. I recognized most of the faces, all neighbors from our subdivision of about 200 homes. Susan sat at the head table with the 4 other board members: Vice President Donald Marsh, Secretary Patricia Wung, Treasurer Gary Stevens, and Member-at-Large Linda Kowalski. Susan looked supremely confident, with a presentation remote in her hand and her laptop connected to a projector screen. The meeting started with standard business: minutes from the last meeting, a financial report from Gary, discussion of upcoming holiday decorations. Then Susan stood up. "Now we come to the main issue that prompted tonight's meeting," she said, clicking to bring up a slide on the screen. It showed a photograph of my driveway, wood stacks clearly visible. Commercial operations in our residential neighborhood. She launched into a presentation that was impressive in its thorough misrepresentation of facts. She claimed I was running a major commercial enterprise that brought constant truck traffic and created an eyesore that was destroying property values. She showed photographs that she had clearly taken from angles designed to make my wood stacks look as large and messy as possible, though anyone who actually visited my property would see they were neat and organized. "This type of commercial operation," Susan continued, "is exactly what our HOA covenants are designed to prevent. Mr. Garrison has turned his home into a business, and if we allow this, what's next? Auto repair shops, restaurants. We must draw the line here and now." She clicked to her final slide, which showed a proposed resolution to ban all commercial activities in the subdivision, with no exceptions. "I move that we adopt this resolution immediately and enforce it with strict penalties," Susan concluded. "Starting with Mr. Garrison's illegal firewood operation. There was some murmuring in the crowd. I noticed several people looking at me with sympathy, but others seemed swayed by Susan's presentation. Tom stood up. "Madam President, may I address the board?" Susan's eyes narrowed. "And you are Tom Bradley, attorney for Mr. Garrison. I'd like to present some factual information that I believe the board and membership should consider before voting on anything." "This isn't a courtroom," Susan said dismissively. "No, but this is a formal HOA meeting," Tom replied smoothly. "And under North Carolina law and your own bylaws, members have the right to speak on matters affecting their property. Unless you'd like to add denying members their legal rights to the list of issues we'll be discussing tonight." Donald Marsh, the vice president, spoke up. "Let him speak, Susan. We should hear all sides." Susan sat down with obvious reluctance, and Tom took the floor. He set up his own laptop and began his presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about facts instead of inflammatory rhetoric," Tom began. He clicked to show a photograph of my business registration certificate, enlarged so everyone could read it clearly. "Mr. Garrison operates Garrison Firewood Services, a sole proprietorship registered with the North Carolina Secretary of State since October 2021. This registration number can be verified by anyone with internet access." He clicked to the next slide, showing my sales tax permit. "He holds sales tax permit number 7,743,892, issued by the North Carolina Department of Revenue. This means he collects and remits sales tax on his transactions, contributing to the state's revenue." The next slides showed excerpts from my tax returns, with personal information redacted but clearly showing my business income and the substantial taxes I had paid. Over the past 3 years, Mr. Garrison has paid over $40,000 in state and federal taxes from his firewood business, Tom continued. "He's not running some under-the-table operation. He's a legitimate, tax-paying business owner." He pulled up the county zoning ordinance. According to Mecklenburg County Ordinance 47.39, home-based businesses are permitted in residential zones provided they meet certain criteria. Minimal customer traffic, no employees beyond household members, no external modification to the residence, and no nuisance factors such as excessive noise, odor, or traffic. Mr. Garrison meets all these criteria. Tom then displayed the HOA covenants, specifically Section 7.3. Your own covenants explicitly allow home-based businesses that comply with county zoning and don't create nuisances. The covenant was written this way deliberately because the developers recognized that many professionals work from home. Accountants, consultants, writers, artists, and yes, seasonal businesses like firewood sales. He showed photographs of my property from neutral angles, showing the neat wood stacks, the minimal signage, and the overall tidy appearance. "Now let's address Mrs. Schneider's claims about truck traffic," Tom continued. "Mr. Garrison maintains delivery logs for tax purposes. In the past year, he has averaged fewer than 3 customer pickups per week. Most of his business involves him delivering to customers. Compare that to the average household, which receives multiple delivery trucks per week from Amazon, FedEx, UPS, and various food delivery services." Some people in the audience chuckled at that. Tom pressed his advantage. "As for property values, I've brought a letter from Jennifer Morris, a real estate agent with Keller Williams who specializes in this area." He displayed the letter on screen. "Miss Morris states that she's aware of no negative impact on property values from Mr. Garrison's business, and that, in fact, having a well-maintained property with a legitimate business operation can be seen as a positive in some markets." Tom clicked to a new slide. "Now, Let's discuss what has actually happened here. Mr. Garrison has been subjected to harassment, including a false police report that wasted the time of law enforcement. Mrs. Schneider trespassed on his property with a private inspector without the legally required notice. She has made defamatory statements about his business being illegal when she had access to information proving it was fully licensed and legal. He paused for effect. If the HOA votes to adopt Mrs. Schneider's proposed resolution, you will be in violation of North Carolina law, which prohibits HOAs from creating rules that contradict county and state regulations. You will be exposing yourselves to legal liability, both as a board and as individual members. And you will be setting a precedent that the HOA can simply ignore its own written covenants whenever the president takes a personal dislike to something. Tom clicked to his final slide. Mr. Garrison is not asking for special treatment. He's asking to be allowed to continue doing what he's been doing legally and properly for 3 years. He's asking that the HOA follow its own rules and state law, and he's asking that the harassment stop. The room was silent when Tom sat down. Susan looked like she wanted to explode, but she was clearly aware that everyone was watching. Patricia Wung, the secretary, spoke up. Susan, did you know about all this documentation, the business license and tax records? I knew he claimed to have permits, Susan said dismissively. Anyone can file paperwork. That doesn't make it appropriate for our neighborhood. But it does make it legal, Gary Stevens, the treasurer, said. And if it's legal under county law and allowed under our covenants, I don't see what grounds we have to stop it. We have the right to maintain standards, Susan insisted. We also have the obligation to follow our own governing documents, Linda Kowalski added. She looked at me directly. Mr. Garrison, I've driven past your property many times. I've never noticed any problems. Your business seems well managed and unobtrusive. Thank you, I said. I've tried to be a good neighbor and run everything professionally. Donald Marsh cleared his throat. I think we need to table Susan's proposed resolution. We clearly need to review the legal issues more carefully before making any decisions. In the meantime, it seems clear that Mr. Garrison is operating within the law and within our covenants. I second the motion to table, Gary said immediately. Susan looked around the table, realizing she had lost control. This is a mistake. We're setting a dangerous precedent. No, Patricia said quietly. We're following the rules. That's what we're supposed to do. The motion to table Susan's resolution passed 4-1, with only Susan voting against it. The meeting moved on to other business, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. But as people were filing out after the meeting, Susan cornered me near the door. This isn't over, she hissed. I will find a way to shut you down. Susan, why are you so obsessed with this? I asked, genuinely curious. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm running a legal business that helps me pay my bills. What's it to you? You're degrading the neighborhood, she said. When I moved here, this was a prestigious address. Now we've got people running businesses out of their garages like some kind of strip mall. One person, I corrected. One person running a quiet, legal business. You're the one causing problems, not me. She stormed off without another word, and I hoped that would finally be the end of it. For a few weeks, things were quiet. I continued my business, enjoying the uptick that always came with December cold snaps. People wanted firewood for their fireplaces and fire pits, and I stayed busy with deliveries and orders. Then, in mid-December, I received a notice from the County Code Enforcement Office. Someone had filed a complaint alleging that I was storing materials in violation of county codes and operating a business without proper permits. I called the number on the notice and spoke with an inspector named Mike Torres. Mr. Torres, I have all the proper permits, I explained. I can email you copies right now. Please do, he said, but I still have to come out and do an inspection since a complaint was filed. It's procedure. Can I ask who filed the complaint? It was anonymous, called in through our hotline. I could guess who had made that call. I sent Mike all my documentation and scheduled an inspection for the following Tuesday. Mike arrived promptly at 9 in the morning, clipboard in hand. He was a middle-aged Hispanic man with a professional demeanor and an eye that suggested he had seen every trick in the book. "Nice setup," he said, looking at my neatly organized wood stacks and covered storage area. "Let's start with your permits." I walked him through everything again, showing him my business license, my layout that complied with setback requirements, my fire safety measures including the clearance I maintained between wood stacks, and my liability insurance. Mike took measurements, made notes, and examined my records. After about an hour, he straightened up and smiled. "Mr. Garrison, you're running one of the cleanest operations I've seen. Everything's by the book. I'm going to close this complaint as unfounded." "Thank you," I said, relieved. "I appreciate you taking the time to verify everything." "Between you and me," Mike said, lowering his voice, "this smells like a personal dispute. We get calls like this sometimes where someone's trying to use the county to settle a score. If you get any more harassment, document it. If someone's filing false complaints, that's a misuse of county resources." After Mike left, I sat down and made detailed notes of everything that had happened, the dates, times, and specifics of each incident. Tom had advised me to keep a journal, and I was glad I had listened. 2 days before Christmas, I was loading my truck for a delivery when Susan appeared again, this time with a man I didn't recognize. He was wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase, and he had the look of someone who charged by the hour. "Mr. Garrison," the man said, "I'm Robert Chen, attorney for the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. I'm here to serve you with notice of a hearing regarding violations of HOA covenants." He handed me an official-looking document. I scanned it quickly, seeing charges of commercial use of residential property, storage of commercial materials, and conducting business activities in violation of community standards. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. "We went through all this at the meeting." The board tabled the resolution. "The board has reconsidered," Susan said with a smile. "We're moving forward with enforcement." I called Tom immediately. He told me not to worry and that he would handle it. The hearing was scheduled for January 15th, giving us plenty of time to prepare. Over the holidays, I learned what had happened. Susan had called a special board meeting between Christmas and New Year's, when she knew Donald Marsh would be out of town visiting family and Patricia Wung would be on vacation. With only 3 board members present, she had pushed through a vote to pursue enforcement action against me. When Donald and Patricia found out, they were furious. Donald called an emergency meeting for January 8th, a week before the scheduled hearing. I attended that meeting with Tom. The room was tense from the start. "Susan, you called a special meeting without proper notice to all board members," Donald said, his voice tight with anger. "That's a direct violation of our bylaws." "The bylaws allow for special meetings with 48 hours notice," Susan countered. "To all board members," Patricia added. "You deliberately scheduled it when you knew Donald and I would be unavailable. That's not just a technical violation, it's a betrayal of your duties as president." "I did what was necessary to protect our neighborhood," Susan insisted. Gary Stevens, who had apparently been the third vote with Susan and Linda Kowalski, looked uncomfortable. "Susan told us it was urgent, that there were new code violations." "There are no code violations," Tom interjected. County Code Enforcement inspected Mr. Garrison's property and found everything in full compliance. I have the written report here." He distributed copies of Mike Torres's inspection report, which gave my operation a clean bill of health. Linda Kowalski, reading the report, looked at Susan with dawning realization. "You told us there were violations. You said the county had found problems." "I said there were issues that needed to be addressed," Susan said. "You lied," Patricia said flatly. "You lied to the board to push through your personal agenda." The meeting deteriorated from there. Donald made a motion to rescind the enforcement action against me, which passed 4-1. Then Patricia made a motion to remove Susan as president for violating the bylaws and misleading the board. That motion required a 2/3 vote of the full membership, so it would have to go to a special election. Susan stood up, her face purple with rage. "You're all making a huge mistake. When property values plummet because we've become a commercial district, don't say I didn't warn you." "Susan, one Firewood business isn't going to tank property values," Gary said wearily. "And even if it was a concern, we can't violate our own covenants and state law just because you don't like it." The motion to call a special election passed unanimously, with Susan abstaining. The election was scheduled for February 1st. I thought the drama was over, but Susan had one more card to play. In late January, I received a letter from the IRS. I had been selected for an audit of my business tax returns for the past 3 years. Now, I'm an accountant. I know that audits happen randomly and that they're not necessarily a sign of wrongdoing. But the timing was suspicious, and when I mentioned it to Tom, he agreed. "Someone may have filed a complaint with the IRS alleging unreported income or tax evasion," he said. "It's a common harassment tactic." "But I've reported everything," I said. "I keep meticulous records." "Then you'll be fine," Tom assured me. "Just gather all your documentation and cooperate fully with the auditor." The audit was scheduled for early February. In the meantime, the special election happened. Susan was removed as HOA president by a vote of 157-12. Donald Marsh was elected as the new president, and the board appointed a new member to fill the vacant position. Susan's husband Robert listed their house for sale 3 days later. I felt a little bad about that, but mostly I felt relieved. The IRS audit took place on a cold Tuesday in February. The auditor, a woman named Janet Reeves, sat up in my dining room with stacks of my records and her laptop. "This is quite organized," she commented, reviewing my files. "Most small business owners don't keep such detailed records." "I'm an accountant by training," I explained. "I know how important good record keeping is." Janet spent 3 hours going through everything: my income records, my expense receipts, my mileage logs, my inventory tracking, and my quarterly tax payment documentation. She cross-referenced my bank statements with my reported income, verified my expenses against my receipts, and checked my math on every form. Finally, she closed her laptop and smiled. "Mr. Garrison, I have to say, this is one of the cleanest small business operations I've audited. Everything matches up perfectly. You've actually overpaid your taxes by about $200 over the 3-year period due to rounding in the government's favor." "So I'm clear?" I asked. "Completely. You'll receive a formal letter within 30 days, but there are no issues whatsoever. Whoever reported you to us wasted everyone's time." After Janet left, I sat in my dining room and felt the tension of the past 4 months finally drain away. It was over. The harassment, the police calls, the false complaints, the audit, all of it was over. But I wasn't going to let it end without consequences. Tom and I filed a formal lawsuit against Susan Schneider personally for harassment, defamation, and filing false reports with government agencies. We sued her for attorney's fees, my lost time and business income from dealing with her harassment, and punitive damages. We also filed complaints with the county about the false code enforcement report and with the IRS about the fraudulent audit request. Filing false reports with government agencies is a crime, and while I wasn't sure anything would come of it, I wanted it on record. The lawsuit took months to work through the system. Susan's attorney tried to get it dismissed, arguing that she was acting in her capacity as HOA president and was therefore protected. The judge disagreed, noting that her actions went beyond her HOA duties and included personal harassment and criminal activity. In August 2025, nearly a year after this all started, we went to trial. It only took 2 days. Tom presented our documentation of every incident: the trespassing, the false police report, the lies to the board, the anonymous code enforcement complaint, and the IRS audit that had clearly been triggered by a false report. We had testimony from Officer Martinez about the false police report, from Mike Torres about the baseless code enforcement complaint, from Janet Reeves about the audit being triggered by an anonymous complaint that proved to be completely unfounded, and from 3 of the HOA board members about Susan's lies and manipulation. Susan's attorney tried to argue that she was just doing her duty as HOA president, but it fell apart when Tom showed that she had continued her harassment even after being removed from that position. The anonymous complaints to code enforcement and the IRS had been filed after she was no longer president. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found in my favor on all counts and awarded me $85,000 in damages, $25,000 for attorney's fees and lost income, and $60,000 in punitive damages. The judge added that the evidence suggested possible criminal activity and that he was referring the matter to the district attorney's office. 2 weeks later, Susan Schneider was charged with filing false police reports and making fraudulent complaints to government agencies. These are misdemeanors in North Carolina, but they carry potential jail time and fines. I attended her court hearing in September. She pleaded guilty as part of a plea agreement. She was sentenced to 6 months probation, required to pay $5,000 in fines, perform 100 hours of community service, and ordered to have no contact with me. Standing in that courtroom, watching Susan agree to the terms of her probation, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me was satisfied to see her held accountable. Part of me felt sad that it had come to this, and part of me was just tired. After the hearing, I drove home to my house in Meadowbrook Estates. The neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. Fall was coming again, which meant another busy season for my firewood business. I had orders already stacking up, and I needed to start preparing. I pulled into my driveway and looked at my wood stacks, neatly arranged and ready for processing. This business that I had built, this legal and legitimate enterprise that helped me pay my bills and served my community, had survived an all-out assault from someone who thought the rules didn't apply to her personal preferences. Bill Richardson waved from across the street. "Hey Frank, you got room in your schedule for my usual winter order?" "Absolutely," I called back. "I'll put you down for delivery in November." Donald Marsh, still serving as HOA president, stopped by that evening. "Wanted to check in," he said. "Make sure everything's settled." "It's settled," I confirmed. "No more issues." "Good. And Frank, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize for what you went through. Susan's behavior was inexcusable, and we should have put a stop to it sooner." "You did what you could," I said. "Sometimes people like Susan need to face real consequences before they'll stop." "True enough. By the way, We're updating the HOA covenants to make it even clearer that legitimate home businesses are allowed. We don't want any future board member trying to pull something like this again." After Donald left, I sat on my front porch with a beer and watched the sun set over the neighborhood. It had been a long, difficult year, but I had stood my ground, fought for what was right, and won. My business was safe. My reputation was intact. And Susan Schneider had learned that you can't use your position to harass people and expect to get away with it. The next morning, I got an email from a reporter at the Charlotte Observer. Someone had tipped them off about the case, and they wanted to do a story about HOA overreach and abuse of power. I agreed to an interview. The article ran 2 weeks later, on the front page of the local section. It detailed the entire saga, from Susan's initial harassment through her criminal conviction. The reporter had done her homework, interviewing other victims of aggressive HOA enforcement across the Charlotte area, and speaking with legal experts about the limits of HOA authority. The response was immediate and overwhelming. I received dozens of emails and calls from people who had faced similar situations with their HOAs. Several were dealing with harassment over home businesses, others over minor covenant disputes that had spiraled out of control. Tom called me after the article ran. "Frank, I've had 6 new clients contact me this week, all dealing with HOA issues. You've started something here." "I just wanted to run my business in peace," I said. "I know. But your willingness to fight back and document everything has given other people a roadmap. That article is going to help a lot of people." A month later, the North Carolina State Legislature introduced a bill to reform HOA regulations, including stronger protections for home-based businesses and penalties for HOA board members who abuse their authority. The bill cited my case as an example of why reform was needed. I was invited to testify before the state legislative committee considering the bill. Standing in the state capitol in Raleigh, I told my story to a room full of lawmakers, emphasizing that I wasn't against HOAs in general, just against abuse of power. "HOAs serve an important purpose," I told the committee. "They maintain common areas, enforce reasonable standards, and help preserve property values, but they need clear limits and accountability. Board members shouldn't be able to use their positions to pursue personal vendettas or ignore their own governing documents." The bill passed in March 2026, becoming law on July 1st. It included provisions explicitly protecting home-based businesses that complied with zoning laws, requiring HOAs to follow their own procedures and bylaws, and creating penalties for board members who filed false reports or abused their authority. Governor Roy Cooper mentioned my case specifically when he signed the bill into law. As for me, I continued running Garrison Firewood services. Business actually improved after all the publicity. People appreciated that I had stood up for small business owners and fought back against bureaucratic overreach. I hired my first employee in the summer of 2026, a college kid named Jason, who needed work during his summer break. My seasonal income grew enough that I was able to cut back on my accounting work and focus more on the firewood business. Susan and Robert Schneider's house sold in December 2025. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they had moved to a community without an HOA, which seemed fitting. I never saw Susan again after her court hearing, and I was fine with that. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA, under Donald's leadership, became a model of reasonable governance. They enforced the covenants fairly and consistently, but they also showed common sense and respect for residents' rights. Property values actually increased, partly due to the positive publicity the neighborhood received for standing up against abuse of power. Bill Richardson joked that I had made the neighborhood famous. "We're the HOA that got it right," he said. "People want to live here because they know they won't be harassed by power-hungry board members." In the fall of 2026, I met a woman named Sarah Sullivan at a community event. She was a teacher at the local elementary school, recently divorced, with a great sense of humor and a no-nonsense attitude toward life. We started dating, and by the following spring, she had moved into my house. Sarah thought my firewood business was charming. "You're like a modern-day pioneer," she said, watching me split logs in the backyard. "Providing an essential service, working with your hands, being your own boss. You forgot to mention fighting off hostile HOA presidents," I added. She laughed. "That too. Though I'm hoping those days are behind you." They were. The new HOA board was professional and fair, the neighborhood was peaceful, and my business thrived. I had proven that standing up for your rights, documenting everything, and refusing to be bullied could actually work. Looking back, I realized that Susan Schneider had actually done me a favor, though not in the way she intended. Her harassment had forced me to get all my documentation in perfect order, had given me a platform to advocate for small business rights, and had ultimately made my business stronger and more successful. The experience had also taught me valuable lessons about patience, persistence, and the importance of knowing your rights. I had learned that bullies often back down when confronted with facts and legal authority, that documentation is crucial in any dispute, and that sometimes you have to fight for what's right even when it's exhausting and expensive. In December 2027, 3 years after Susan first confronted me in my driveway, I was featured in a national small business magazine. The article, titled "Standing Your Ground: How One Firewood Dealer Beat HOA Harassment and Changed State Law," told my story as an example of entrepreneurial perseverance. I framed a copy and hung it in my garage workshop, next to my business license and my tax permits. They were reminders of what I had built and what I had overcome. Sarah and I got married in May 2028 in a simple ceremony in our backyard. Many of our neighbors attended, including Donald Marsh and most of the HOA board. It was a celebration not just of our relationship, but of the community we had all built together, one based on mutual respect and reasonable governance rather than petty tyranny. During his toast at the reception, Donald raised his glass and said, "To Frank, who proved that one person standing up for what's right can make a difference, and to Meadowbrook Estates, the neighborhood that learned to get it right." As I stood there with Sarah beside me, surrounded by friends and neighbors, looking at my home and my business and the life I had built, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The battle with Susan Schneider had been difficult and stressful, but it had led to positive changes that went far beyond my own situation. The North Carolina HOA reform law had helped hundreds of homeowners protect their rights. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA had become a model for fair governance. And I had proven that a small business owner with documentation and determination could stand up to harassment and win. My firewood business continued to grow. By 2029, I had 3 employees and was supplying firewood to customers across Charlotte and surrounding counties. I had expanded into hardwood lumber sales and was considering adding a line of outdoor furniture made from reclaimed wood. Every piece of wood I processed, every delivery I made, every satisfied customer who thanked me for my service was a reminder that I had made the right choice in fighting back. I had refused to let Susan Schneider's harassment shut down my legitimate business, and that decision had changed not just my life, but the lives of countless other home-based business owners across North Carolina. The story of my fight with the HOA became part of the neighborhood lore, told to new residents as an example of how Meadowbrook Estates had learned to balance community standards with individual rights. Kids in the neighborhood would sometimes ask me about the time you beat the HOA, and I would tell them about the importance of knowing your rights, keeping good records, and standing up for yourself when you know you're in the right. In quieter moments, sitting on my porch in the evening with Sarah, watching the sun set over our neighborhood, I would think about how different things could have been. If I had given in to Susan's demands, I would have lost my business and my income. If I hadn't kept such detailed records, I might not have been able to prove my case. If I hadn't had Tom's legal help, the outcome could have been very different. But I had done everything right, and that had made all the difference. I had built a legitimate business, followed all the rules, and documented everything. When challenged, I had stood my ground and fought back with facts and law rather than emotion and anger. That was ultimately why I won. Not because I was more aggressive or more powerful than Susan Schneider, but because I was right and could prove it. The truth, backed by documentation and legal authority, had prevailed over harassment and abuse of power. As I moved forward with my life and my business, I carried those lessons with me. I continued to keep meticulous records, to follow all regulations, and to treat my customers and neighbors with respect and professionalism. I stayed involved with the HOA, serving on committees and helping to ensure that the reforms we had implemented remained in place. And whenever I heard about someone else facing HOA harassment or abuse of power, I would reach out to offer advice and support. I had been through the battle and come out the other side, and I wanted to help others do the same. The firewood that I sold warmed homes across Charlotte. But more importantly, my fight against HOA overreach had helped warm the hearts of homeowners across North Carolina, knowing that they had protections against abuse, and that standing up for their rights could actually work. That was my real legacy, more valuable than any amount of money or any business success. I had made a difference, stood up for what was right, and helped create positive change that would benefit people for years to come. And it all started because I refused to let an angry HOA president shut down my legal firewood business. Sometimes the smallest battles lead to the biggest victories, and sometimes standing your ground on a matter of principle can change more than you ever imagined possible.